Well, good morning, viewers. Would you look at what I have here? 1949 Plymouth Suburban. Interesting. I like this plate. Gratitude. Wow. Anyways, it's got a early 90's GM drivetrain in it. Looks like a 305 throttle body with a 700R4, I believe. And it occasionally stalls. You'll be just driving and it'll quit. And we're going to have a look at that. It has a diagnostic connector wired onto the dash. The ECM's in the dash. I see some ground wires here that could use a little attention. These two grounds on the thermostat housing are pretty important. One's an ECM ground, one's a O2 sensor ground. We also have a potential for the way it cuts out, the way he described it, it sounds like it's an ignition related problem. It just shuts off, and then when it starts up, it's not flooded, or it doesn't appear to be loaded up, so it's acting like it's losing reference signal. So we're going to have a look at inside the distributor cap. I'm going to connect the scan tool to this thing. I think he said the connector, oh yeah, OBD1 connector is right here. So I'm going to connect the scan tool to it and see if there's any fault codes. This vintage of ECM was also common to act up as well. I hope it's not the ECM. So on these old OBD1 systems, this throttle body system, we needed the DA5 adapter to convert the OBD2 plug to the 12 pin, and then the GM1 adapter, I believe it is. And you also need power at this adapter because there's no power in the diagnostic connector here. So we've got a jumper lead running to the battery. So we're going to turn the key on here and see if there's any fault codes. It's got the instrument cluster, looks like, out of the Chevy truck. Who's ever done this build did a pretty decent job. It looks pretty professional. So it's definitely not going to support auto ID. And I don't know what VIN number is in this computer at all. So I'm just going to manually ID it as a GMC manual ID. And let's go for about a 92 pickup rear wheel drive with a 5-liter TBI VIN H. And it won't support a network code scan, or there's no network anyways. That vehicle only had powertrain under 8600 GVW, automatic transmission. And GM1 adapter, DA5 cable adapter, and power. Display codes. Let's see if there's any codes. No communication. Make sure I turn the key on. So I decided to try a couple different IDs. A 93 Chevy pickup, rear wheel drive, and it displays no codes. And let's see if we get data out of it. Yeah, there wasn't much for a data list. We thought this was impressive back in the day. Let's have a look at barometric pressure, oxygen sensor, open loop, coolant temperature 44°C, that's about right. I don't think it has intake air temperature, it just had a coolant temp sensor. And where's barrel? Brake switch pressed, shows the brake switch is pressed right now. Brake lights aren't on. TCC applied. Barrel 28.9 inches of mercury and 4.76 volts, so that looks realistic. Let's fire it up and see what the data does while it's running. So these early systems ran in open loop for a long time. They're a non-heated oxygen sensor. So it's in open loop. Probably has to warm up a bit more before it'll switch to closed loop. Seems to be running pretty decent right now. 900 RPM. Fuel trim at 128, and that used to be called long-term and short-term fuel, or it used to be called integrator and block learn. Long-term is block learn and short-term is integrator, but they're not valid until it goes into closed loop. So we'll let it run for a few seconds to see what it does. I think he's got a defective brake switch or an out-of-adjustment brake switch, because although the brake, that's interesting, it's just about put there. Just stumbled for a second and almost shut off. Like it's just about stalled out there. Caught itself. Still in open loop though, but that's not uncommon for these engines. They ran in open loop for sometimes several minutes. So now it's gone to closed loop, as you can see. And it just starts toggling the O2 sensor virtually. Again, pretty slow system. This is the way they were. Caught that one stumble there where it just about died. I think it's wise to pull the distributor cap off and have a look in there before we get too carried away here. So I noticed the wires going to the ignition coil from the wiring harness here were stressed quite a bit because this harness needs to be secured. I tried wiggling the wires on the coil and the distributor while it was running, and it didn't skip or stumble. I can't get this screw out of the distributor cap. It seems like they put this used engine in without doing anything to it. I got the other one out, but I can't get this screw and I can't get in here. I'm going to see if I can cut it with a zip cut blade. I don't want to, well, I might end up having to change the cap and rotor anyways. Chances are it's been on there for a while. This is definitely not a new, recently installed part. So I tried to drill the top of the screw, but it's super hard. Ended up grinding the cap with a die grinder. Couldn't get in there with a zip cut blade. The cap's pretty much toast anyways. Looks like original. It's a GM cap, Delco Remy. So it's probably been on there for 25 years. Lots of oxidation inside here. We're going to get this piece of screw out of here hopefully, and then take the module out, clean the base of the module. And I'm worried about the pickup connections on the other side here, the magnetic pulse pickup connections. Well, I've certainly seen worse. I've seen where this connector is all crumbled up, falls apart. But we're going to clean the terminals on here, clean the base of the distributor. I got a new cap and rotor coming for it. We're also going to fix these grounds, put a proper soldered ground eyelet on there, and see what happens. So there's the base of the ignition module cleaned up. It must ground through this base. Also clean up where the screws attach there, and clean up the base of the distributor where it attaches. You must put dielectric grease on here to transfer the heat. I got that piece of screw out, and I cleaned up these terminals with a diamond file. The rotor was tough to come off. It was rusted on there, but we got it off. And we're going to put some dielectric grease on the rotor shaft as well. So there's the new cap and rotor installed. I secured this wiring harness so that it's not pulling on the coil. I soldered new lugs to this, took the studs out, both studs turned. Had a hell of a time. I had to heat the nuts up. Regardless, cleaned the grounds, repaired four grounds actually. So we're going to start it up and run it and see how it runs now. So again, we get no communication. I'm wondering if that ECM is failing, because that was a typical way that the ECM used to fail on these in those days. It would cut out, you get a lack of communication,
I'll check my connection. So I didn't do anything and it just started to communicate again. So that's actually bothering me. It's running fine right now, but it's only been running for a few seconds. It's still in open loop. Oxygen sensor still not switching. So I'm going to let it run for a while. Maybe monitor the 5-volt reference from the computer on the TPS. Well, I think we've come on to something. It stopped communicating and stalled dead. Backpinning the 5-volt reference at the TPS, initially I had nothing. I wasn't making sure. I was making sure I wasn't making a connection. I unplugged the TPS, figured out that it was the gray wire that was supposed to have the 5 volts on it. Now I got 5 volts and now I got communication again. So I'm going to start it and see what happens again. You see the check engine light is on now too. Well, that's because I had the TPS unplugged. Now we're going to let it run for a while and see if we lose this TPS 5-volt reference. So it did set a TPS code because I had the key on when I unplugged it. So I've cleared the code. It's running perfectly now. Barrel voltage is 4.6, TPS voltage is 0.5. I got a graphing meter on the 5-volt reference at the TPS. I'm going to watch it and let it idle for a while and see if it'll cut out again. So behind the homemade console here is a wiring maze, and up above here is the actual ECM. I'm trying to get it out. The failure mode of this thing is very, very similar to an ECM breaking down, where it would temporarily lose communication. Sometimes if you had a voltmeter on the 5-volt reference on one of the sensors, you'd see it drop to like 1 volt and it would stall. That's the type of failure. Like, I noticed a couple of orange wires just hanging here. I don't know what these are for. To wiper motor. Well, I'm gonna see if I can fish this harness out of here, or this ECM out of here. There it is up there. I need the number off of it. So there's the service number, 16197427. These are plug and play basically, with replacement of or transferring the MEMCAL or PROM for the correct tire size and axle ratio. Sometimes if you tapped on these things they would break down, but it's not acting up now. Oh well. I'll leave it like this for now. See if I can get it to act up. In the harness here is the set timing connector for adjusting the base timing. That needs to be basically accessible. So we're going to untape that and put it in a more accessible spot. Well, it's been running for 45 minutes now. Hasn't skipped a beat. Other than the coolant temperature rising, I found the customer's manual electric cooling fan switch. So aside from that, everything looks normal. But given the fact that I've experienced this type of failure where it'll lose communication and stall, I wasn't in the vehicle to notice if the check engine light flickered, but that was another characteristic of this type of failure. The check engine light would flash or flicker repeatedly. Aside from that, the local recycling yard has a used ECM, so I'm going to put one in simply because it's easy to do, and based on past experience I think that's where we're going with this thing. I've wiggled the harnesses and checked the grounds and it won't skip a beat, so hopefully that fixes it. So I'm analyzing that first recording that I made where it actually cut out while I was sitting there idling. It didn't stall, but it cut out for a fraction of a second. You can see the RPM went from 1275 to 0, and then it flared back up again. I'm looking at what other data parameters changed. Fuel trim cell went from cell 130 to 0, or fuel trim went from 130 to 0. And I did notice something unusual down here. You know, the map vacuum changed after the fact. Where this cursor is here is where the actual stall occurred. Map voltage increased because the engine revved up, but that was after the fact. Scrolling down and looking at other data parameters here. Battery voltage dipped. Where's battery voltage here? But again, that was after it just about stalled. But I did see, I think the coolant temperature, spark advance, went from 29 to 0. Desired EGR. Thought the coolant temperature reading went to -40 for a fraction for one frame. Where is the coolant temperature? Right here. See, it spiked down to -40 for a fraction for one that exact frame when it cut out. So you can see the coolant temperature here dropped to -40. Just for one frame. There it's at 55. There it's -40. Then it's at 49. Spark advance dropped to 0. So I can't see. It still leads me to believe the ECM is going south. Because even if we had an intermittent glitch in the temperature reading, with the spark advance wouldn't drop to 0. Interesting. So on the right we have the original ECM, and this is a used replacement one here. Same part numbers. Service number 16196395, 16197274. So I got the used ECM in here with the original memcal installed in it, and I had it running, talking to the owner on the phone, and it quit. Imagine that. Just like you turn the key off. But I also noticed after it quit that I had no check engine light. With the key on, normally the check engine light should be on, and it wasn't. The service engine soon light. I attempted to start it and it wouldn't crank. Or it cranked, but it wouldn't fire. I didn't have the scanner hooked up to it. By the time I got the scanner booted up and connected, it was communicating again, and now it's running again. It's kind of acting like we're losing the ignition feed or battery feed to the ECM. Now keep in mind this is all customized, so here's the fuse panel under the dash here, and I'm wiggling that, and I'm wiggling the wires at the ignition switch, and nothing's changing. I guess we're going to monitor the battery feed and ignition feed wires at this ECM and see if we lose them. So I'm checking pinouts at the ECM. F17 is ignition power. F15 is ignition power, and F16 is battery power. So that's F17, that pink wire, and it doesn't light my headlight. Yet if I put it into this one, as you can see, it lights my headlight just fine. And this ignition feed is the second one down, up. That lights the headlight, but this doesn't light the headlight. I double check that wiring. So it turns out I was looking at this connector wrong. That pink wire is actually the PCM trans range mode switch. So F15 is the second terminal in here. I think you can make out the 15 on the connector, but there's no terminal in there. Get over here, shows F15 12 volt ignition feed, pink and black. I don't have that wire. I've only got E15 and E16, and they load test fine. So that's these two wires here. Focus. Yeah, 15 and 16. The orange wire is live all the time, and the 15 is hot with the key on. What's the other pink wire there? Let's see. That's 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It calls it red. Oh, it's red. PCM trans range mode switch. Well, there appears to be only one ignition feed and one battery feed, and they both load test good. So let's qualify the grounds. So according to this, the grounds are on the other connector, on the red connector, and cavity A1 black white and A2 tan white. Interesting, it says one ground is on the left rear cylinder head. And any other grounds? Just two grounds, that's all I see. Oh, there's a system ground, A12. So there's A1, I think that is, and A2, and it lights a headlight by supplying a ground. So those two grounds test decent. I wonder if we're losing power from the ignition circuit. I'm going to reconnect the ECM, back pin these two orange wires, or the orange wire and the pink wire, which appear to be the only ignition power and battery power, and the two grounds here, these two grounds. This black white is the main ground, and then this second one here, and see if we lose either while it's running. So I got 3-channel graphing multimeter connected. Channel 1, the yellow trace is on ignition, pretty noisy. Channel 2, green trace is on battery power. Channel 3, the blue trace is on the ground, and the vehicle is running. I don't like how electrically noisy that signal is. Well, we're going to let it run for a few minutes and see if we lose this ignition feed. Maybe we got just something silly like a failing ignition switch. Because remember, I said we lose communication with the ECM, and we also have no check engine light, and then it just mysteriously fixes itself. Well, it's acted up, and look what we've got. You can hear a relay turning on and off. We've got no battery feed. The green trace. There goes the check engine light. Heard the fuel pump kick in. You've seen the voltage come back. So at least we're chasing that orange wire. Where does that orange wire come from? I'm turning the key on and off repeatedly. You can see the ignition voltage dropping when I turn the key off, on. It's quite a drop in the voltage, but the battery's getting low because I've got the key on. Well, we're chasing that battery feed wire to the ECM. So it's terminal E16 on the blue connector. Comes from a fusible link and originally came from the battery junction block terminal. Let's see if we can find that. So I don't know what he did with the junction block that would have normally been on the firewall. There's a couple of fuse links running up to this sketchy battery positive cable, but there's no orange one. So that's the alternator one, and that's a main feed one. I'm going to have to ask him where he put that junction block, because he must have stole power off of that battery power for that orange wire. So that's the main bus bar that would have normally been along the top side of the right side, passenger side of the firewall, and the fuse link on the orange wire here is the one that feeds the ECM power. So I got it. Oh, it just dropped to 0. My headlight just went out. Let's move that wire. Something's broken in there. That fuse link is broken, or I got a headlight connected directly to the ECM and the battery negative post, and I lost the power now. I bet you I don't have the ECM plugged in. Well, we're getting close. Let's see if I can get this light to come back on. So I've got no power on the other side of that fuse link, yet I have power at the fuse link connection. So the wires, the fuse link is corroded internally or something. Wow, that's crazy. I was manipulating these wires in here, and the light, my headlight went off. So there's a piece of fusible link. I cut it out, soldered in a new one. Haven't hooked it up yet. I'm about to hook it up, and my headlight comes on. Imagine that. Oh wow. So I'm reading 13.57 on that wire now. I guess I put the original ECM back in with the original prom in the original ECM. Oh, I am going to take this wire apart. Sometimes they used to get oxidation in this plastic splice and corrode, but I had power at this end but no power at this end, so it has to have failed inside. So I ground the plastic off of that. You can see the corroded connection right there. Normally it would pull out, but it didn't pull out. It's still bonded in the plastic. Remember, that fuse panel, or that junction bar, lived on the firewall of the original truck for 20 plus years until it got installed in here. Well, it's been running okay now for half an hour, so I think we can put it back together.